Savannah was walking before him when the world recoiled and she vanished from his sight. The last time he had seen her was in that flash of light, followed by the long darkness. Memories slithered into his consciousness, surfacing like phantoms, invading his mind like an unyielding burden. His eyes, devoid of vigor, remained shut, while his body lay, a mountain of flesh and bone, crushed by its own weight. He had to find Savannah at any cost. He felt that something terrible had happened, driving him with raw desperation. A ray of light pierced through the thin gap between his eyelashes, stabbing him with a cruel glare. Golden walls glistened, a ceiling elevated endlessly, machines woven with ethereal threads around. Where had he ended up? He rose with spectral slowness from his resting place. Delicate nets snapped, detaching from his skin like serpentine coils. With a sudden motion, he stood, seeking what was fused with him, but found only emptiness. Every trace vanished into nothingness. Gathering his courage, he began to walk among the ruins of what seemed a decrepit palace. Corridors bathed in an amber light from scornful flames. Arcane symbols and twisted machinery seemed to breathe within the walls, moving like pulsing arteries of an incomprehensible being. He passed an imposing window, beyond which stretched endless expanses of powdered gold. A red sun, eternally reflected on the rich plain, cast its rays, tongues of fire on the cold metal, until they met his face, carved by wonder and confusion. Where had the sea gone? Where had his companions vanished? Wrapped in a desperate embrace, he continued to walk. He traversed halls filled with trophies of another era, of alien worlds. He climbed endless stairs with the growing burden of bewilderment and despondency, until he reached a vast room, a plaza, at the center of which stood a great column, coiled upon itself like an ancient tree. Beyond, the exterior opened up. The smell of dust and stale air permeated the atmosphere. No wind, no cloud to break the horizon. Only the pure splendor of a forgotten world. "Approach," the column whispered softly. The man quickly stepped back, seeking the passage through which he had entered, but the walls seemed fused. He found himself trapped in a shimmering hollow, hundreds of meters above the ground. "There is no need to fear," whispered the gentle steel. "I am here to tell you a story, the greatest story ever written." The man tried to speak, but the words died in his throat. The total absence of reference points had left him adrift in the flow of events, realizing only then that he remembered nothing of his past existence. Who was he? Where did he come from? Where had he lived? In the fog of vanished memories, he could only recall the soft embrace of Savannah and her sweet eyes. This is the story of Aron the Dreamer and how he brought about prosperity, said the column. He was born in humble lands, surrounded by mortals, creatures at the mercy of fate's works, continued the voice of the metal. He grew up shrouded in the anguish of chaos, tormented by hunger, disease, and suffering. He knew death and its indulgent caresses. It was then that he conceived the idea of greatness, of a free world, a paradise where one could graze and enjoy their own nature, the column continued. He dedicated his resources, his strength, his time, and his life to creating a faithful servant, the living steel, capable of fulfilling his desires, consciousness given to alien matter. He used this sun to defeat universal enemies, overcoming death, granting the power to write fate into mortal hands. The man looked around, observing the cold metal reflected on the floor beneath him and in the surrounding walls of the building. Later, alongside men, he sailed the stars, exploring planets and galaxies, living on curiosity and discovery, spreading joy in the cosmos. He forged this world where superfluous riches were buried, symbol of a different era. An entire planet covered in shining matter without guardians. A sense of wonder pervaded him as he gazed at the sky, deeply engrossed in his thoughts. Aron. That name did not remind him of anyone, yet he had to be a legend. Together with his beloved, who was always by his side, he led men towards unreachable goals, towards unimaginable boundaries, continued the voice of the column. However, with regret, he realized that some populations were not up to the conceived plan, imperishable, too weak to follow him, their limbs weary and their minds clouded, it continued solemnly. He had no choice but to abandon them to guide humanity on its path. The offense spread like a serpent among minds. Corrupted thoughts gained ground. He had to abandon his family to restore order, to reunite intentions. The war was long and bloody. The scythe of death generated hatred, and hatred nourished myths and distorted beliefs. Soon he realized that his only true ally was the steel he had created. He commanded the metal to end the war, and so it was. He commanded it to dominate minds and quell conspirators, and so it was. He commanded it to serve him in his sacred work, and thus the steel became his sword and shield. Every man and every living being, blind to humanity's fate. He entrusted the metal with his one true love, sick, incapable of conceiving the greatness of that plan. The man, incredulous, continued to stare at the column, his gaze terrified by the mad atrocity. That column seemed to believe it was speaking of a Messiah, a savior. Aron was a murderer, the greatest monster history had ever known. His knees gave way. He fell to the ground, overwhelmed by an indomitable disgust. He remained alone for a long time. The steel built an empire, perfect and pure, it continued. His story became myth and then legend, but there was no one who could discover it. Thus, he conceived the idea to be reborn again, to return to non-existence, erasing his memory and starting anew from the first true moment. Oh, Aron, I, your only son, return to you the keys of creation after your long slumber. Enjoy your newfound splendor, shine in your glory, for it is eternal and unattainable. The triumph accompanied the man's fall, who collapsed to the ground, blinded by despair, vomiting air and suffering, remaining lying in a subdued and silent cry. Silence reigned for long moments, the weight of stillness crushing above them. "What is my next command, Father?" The man lay supine, hands covering his face, curled up, fragile as a pile of bones on the floor. "I want to forget," he finally managed to say, his voice hoarse, tired. The words echoed in the silence of that place, words that no one could ever hear. "Make me forget, again, forever." The silence enveloped the mourning of those words, which were the last ever spoken.